All right. Well, we can get started, and we'll welcome and invite more people in if more people log in. We're excited to have everyone here tonight. Today is the second night in our Raising Healthy Families series this year. My name is Akilah Reynolds. I'm one of the assistant clinical directors and the pre and postdoctoral director at Community Institute for Psychotherapy. We also have Amanda Mason there. She's another assistant clinical director, and she'll be really helping with the tech side of things as well and monitoring the chat for any questions. I will also be helping. I want to shout out Robin. She's our executive director. She's on board as well, helping out. We're so glad that we were able to offer this series that provides an opportunity for everyone to learn and to think about important issues that are affecting our families. We believe that learning about mental health and wellness issues is really important to help us decrease the stigma and help us raise healthy families. Community Institute for Psychotherapy is a nonprofit, tax-exempt center. We were founded in 1977 to provide quality, affordable mental health care services to Marin County individuals and families so that they may reestablish mental and emotional well-being and live satisfying and productive lives. We offer short and long-term outpatient psychotherapy on a sliding scale to adults, children, families, couples who would otherwise not be able to afford such services. Before we get started, I want to do a special thank you and acknowledgement to Mary Jane Burke and John Carroll, as well as the Marin County Office of Education for co-sponsoring this event. And then I just also want to say, we would not be here without our sponsors. And these are businesses in Marin who care. Please take note of them, and on an occasion when you can, seek them out and do business. They're helping Marin be healthier. First Federal Savings and Loan, Family Recovery Institute, Bank of Marin, Delfino Green and Green, Luther Bank, and WMB2. Thank you all for your service and for your participation and sponsorship of this event. Without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker, Jennifer Kellogg. She has a doctorate in clinical psychology. Early on in her career, she was drawn to working with teens and their families. She's been working with adolescents for over 10 years in a variety of settings. Her approach is one that encourages identifying a person's strength to foster confidence and increase resiliency. Her work includes community mental health clinic focusing on substance use disorder, intensive outpatient work for teens with high-risk behaviors such as non-suicidal self-injury, substance use, and other high-risk behaviors, and assessment. Dr. Kellogg works in private practice focusing on adults, teens, families of teens, and also couples. She has 2 grown children of her own and her therapy dog, which you might be able to see in the background. We got to meet Asha earlier. In her time, she also enjoys traveling, hiking, camping, gardening, and cooking for her family and friends. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Kellogg. Thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Great, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. And I think what we're going to do is I'm going to start. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to go through that. We kind of were deciding if we wanted to open it up to questions throughout it. But now that I'm thinking about it, I think I'm going to do the PowerPoint presentation. And at the end of it, we'll open it up for discussion and questions. And if somebody has something specific about one of the points in the PowerPoint, we can bring up the PowerPoint and go back to it. Hopefully that will work for everybody. So let me figure out the technology here. So I'm going to share screen. And hope that I do this correctly. Bear with me. Okay, can somebody on the team let me know if the PowerPoint's up?
Not yet.
How about now?
You're good.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so as I said, this one in the part of the series is talking to our children and adolescents about suicide, self-harm, and other risk factors. The other risk factors I'm not actually addressing too much in the PowerPoint. However, I want that to be open. If there's specific questions in the open forum, we can talk about that. Okay. So our children are now in this unique world that many of us did not face. I know for me, I grew up in the 1980s, so many of the things that were unique to my generation had to do with the Cold War, the emerging AIDS epidemic, and many other contexts that we didn't have. In fact, in the 80s, we didn't have a cell phone. To this generation, their unique world that they face is one that is, based in technology. We know that it's a digital world, and because of that, they have rapid access to all sorts of information that perhaps generations before us did not have. And it comes in a lot of different forms, including social media. So this unique presentation for them, in some ways, they have access to a lot of information, and so they know a lot. And it gives them an increased awareness of the events that are happening around the world. At the same time, because that they are still developing, this is a lot of information for them to take on, and at times it can be a little overwhelming. In addition to that, we are now in this rapid change. The technology, of course, is part of that. But it's rapid change in many ways. We have changing climate. We have immigration and migration that we wouldn't have seen 100 years ago, that now we are having cultures that our teens are being exposed to, which is, in a lot of ways, again, really I think a good thing. At the same time, it's still a lot for them to try to bring into their world and make sense of. And of course, lastly, as we've all been talking about, is that we've had the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, our teens and adolescents, pre-adolescents were particularly impacted by this, from isolation, and more specifically from social restriction of their peers. And this is really important because our teens and our pre-adolescents, one of the most important developmental milestones that they have is all about socialization. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in our next slides. Okay, so I thought I would talk a little bit about developmental aspects, just kind of a review of it. I'm sure many people already know these things, but we're just going to kind of go through that. And to do that, I have to change my view a little bit. Okay. So it's important to know that the growth of the adolescent brain is the second part of a really, really important phase. It's the next big leap in brain development. So 0 to 5, 0 to 3 is a very important stage. There's a lot of development, a lot of neural pathways are being developed. And so that is very important. Then we kind of have a little bit of slowing of the brain development. And then as we go into adolescence, we have the next largest brain development. And there's two important parts of that we really need to know about in understanding our adolescents and our emerging adolescents. So one of the things is that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, and this is where the majority of the development happens. So we're going to see a lot more onboarding of this. At the same time, this is also an important time where we do a lot of pruning. In other words, there's a lot of other things that our brain is kind of developed that no longer suits us. And so it's becoming a more efficient organ. And to do that, it cuts away some stuff and then it adds in a lot of other stuff. While it's adding it in, they're doing this thing that's called myelinization. I have a little bit of video, it'll talk about that a little bit. So the prefrontal cortex is often considered the executive functioning. It has to do with planning, judgment, impulse control, and abstract thinking. Another important thing is the limbic system. Now, the limbic system is in there, and there is development that prior to adolescence. However, recent research is showing that there's a lot more that's going on in the limbic system than what we previously thought. Now that we have fMRIs, we can begin to see that there's a lot more that's going on in the limbic system, where we had really focused on the prefrontal cortex during adolescence. So both of these are really important. So of course, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, there's 7 things that we need to know about the teen brain. So adolescence is an important time because it is this rapid growth. Second, brain development is related to social experience. In other words, this social aspect is very, very important in the development of the brain and functioning, future functioning. So this is another thing that's really great. The teen brain is ready to learn and it is ready to adapt. And I think that is really important to recognize that, because technology is really tasking our brains to a lot of new information that we have to process and learn and begin to adapt to. For the teen brain, that should not be but responds differently to stress than our brain, because of some of the important things that are going on, including hormone changes and also the neurotransmitter, most specifically with serotonin and dopamine. Because of what's going on as these reactions are changing, that brain is a little bit more susceptible to stress. This is one of the reasons why we see a lot more emotionality with our kids, is because we're having this increase in this the better efficiency. It's developing a better efficiency of these really important neurotransmitters, along with this increase of these hormones that are going on. This one, I think, is so important. I talk about this not only to my adults, but I really, really talk about it to our teens. Our teens do not get enough sleep. Sleep is one of the most important factors that we can do to really help overall health, but in particular, mental health. Because of the uniqueness of what's going on with the brain, mental illness may begin to appear during this adolescent time. And so we need to be kind of aware of that. At the same time, the teen brain is pretty resilient. And I think that that is also very important. This is a time that we can really introduce a lot of coping strategies that really can get solidified for our teens. So even though we may begin to see some more mental illness appear at this time, they also have the ability to have a very resilient brain. Okay, so this is a kind of short video on brain changes in adolescence.
When we think about changes that happen during puberty, we usually think about changes that happen to the body. Things like the development of secondary sex characteristics, or changes in height, or an increase in body hair. But those aren't the only changes that happen. There are actually a lot of changes that happen to the brain as well.
Oh, so sorry.
When we think about changes that happen during puberty, we usually think about changes that happen to the body. Things like the development of secondary sex characteristics, or changes in height, or an increase in body hair. But those aren't the only changes that happen. There are actually a lot of changes that happen to the brain as well. And here I have an image of a brain, and this is what you would see if you looked at the side of the brain. So here is the front towards the face, here's the back, and then over here I have another brain, and this brain is sliced in half. So this brain is sliced right down the middle. And these two brains are facing each other. So here's the front, and then here's the back of this one. And one of the major changes that we see during adolescence is the development of the frontal lobe, particularly the prefrontal cortex. And I'll roughly indicate where on the brain that is. And this is the area of the brain that is responsible for what scientists call higher order cognition. Things like thinking about the future and planning and decision making, and also the ability to inhibit certain behaviors and focus on long-term goals. And this part of the brain doesn't really stop maturing until our early 20s. And because it is still developing during the teenage years, because it isn't fully developed, this might help to explain why teenagers sometimes show poor judgment. Another area of the brain that continues to develop during adolescence is the limbic system. And this includes a number of different brain structures. And this image isn't really the best way to view them because a lot of the structures are on either side of the midline. Even so, I want to point out about where they are in the brain. And one structure included in the limbic system is the amygdala, which would be about here. And this is the part of our brain that's responsible for emotions and emotional responses. And it also includes the hypothalamus, which is here. And let me pick a slightly different color for that. And this part of the brain regulates a surprising number of things. But in particular, I want to focus on its role concerning the endocrine system, or the hormone system in our bodies. And to be clear, the limbic system includes a bunch of other structures as well, but I really want to focus on these two, because in combination with the prefrontal cortex, which helps to regulate our emotions, the fact that these structures are still developing during the teenage years might help to explain why teenagers can sometimes be moody, why they might sometimes have emotional outbursts, like yelling at their parents and stomping out of their room and slamming the door. And while I think that this is kind of funny, and while it kind of makes me want to roll my eyes when teenagers act out, this does actually have some really important legal implications. Like whether or not we should be able to charge teenagers like adults when they commit certain crimes. And this is a question that I put to you. Should teenagers get the same treatment as adults if they commit the same crimes? Should they be able to be sentenced to death or to life in prison for acts that they commit prior to turning 18? Do you think that this is a good boundary? Are crimes committed 1 month before someone's 18th birthday really different from crimes that they commit 1 month after? Where should this boundary be? How should we define adulthood? And these are really difficult and serious questions. And it's really not clear what role developmental research has in solving these problems, or if it should even have a role at all. Putting that very serious question aside, another area of the brain that changes during adolescence is the corpus callosum, which you can see here. And this is the area of the brain that connects our left and right hemispheres. And there are a number of things that change about this structure during adolescence. But in particular, I really want to focus on the changes to connections that are associated with language and language learning. And these connections grow before and during puberty, but this growth stops soon afterwards. And this might help to explain why learning a second language is so much easier in childhood as compared to adulthood. So we see changes to those specific brain areas, but there are also other more global changes that are happening in the brain during this period, or changes that are happening throughout the brain. And one thing that we see during this period is an increase in myelination, especially in the areas that are associated with higher order functioning. And to quickly review, this is a neuron, and neurons communicate with each other by sending signals down these long axons. And myelin is a fatty tissue that covers the axons of neurons and helps to increase the speed at which the neurons can communicate. And faster communication between neurons means faster communication between brain areas. And this can help explain why adolescents are able to process information faster than children. Another thing that we see during this time period is that there's an increase in brain volume during early adolescence, and then this shrinks during late adolescence. And this suggests that adolescence is a period of synaptic pruning, or cutting weak connections in the brain. So this is your body literally breaking down connections between neurons. And you might initially think that this is a bad thing, but this pruning is actually really good and it's really important because it allows the body to focus energy and resources on the connections that are used most. And a kind of scary implication of this is that what we do during our teenage years might be literally shaping our brains for the rest of our lives. But there's kind of a use it or lose it principle at work here. So if we spend our free time reading or playing sports or focusing on academics and having good time management skills, then that's what's going to be reinforced. the parts of the brain that are responsible for those behaviors are physically going to be strengthened. But if we spend most of our time watching TV and sitting on our couch and procrastinating, that's what's going to be strengthened instead.
Okay.
When we think about changes,
Sorry about that. Okay, so putting aside some of the social context that the presenter had on there, I think it's important. A couple of the things why I like this video is talking about the limbic system, and that the development of this is highly important, and how these two brain structures speak to each other. And so it's really important because when we talk about the limbic system, the social engagement for the social development for kids is very important. So that part of that brain structure is very important in this. In other words, that limbic system is really paying attention to social cues, emotional cues, and then it's having this conversation as the teen is growing, as the adolescent is growing. It's having that myelinization, which is kind of like, if you thought of it like as an electrical wire, it's like the wrapping around that electrical wire. Those are having a more efficient conversation with the prefrontal cortex, which is about higher order thinking. So in our younger teens, we are seeing less of that. And as they age, as they grow, we're seeing more efficiency. And because of that, we're seeing towards the end of adolescence, we see that they're able to regulate emotions a little bit better. They're also able to understand consequences and future thinking. So the thing about this is that peer and social interactions become more important during this early stages and throughout adolescence, but particularly in the early stages. And so as their peers and social interactions become more important, and part of their job is to individuate and separate from the family, it can be a little bit of an uncomfortable space for the family as well as for the teens, or the coming into the teens. I just had a conversation with a couple that I work with. They came to the session today, and their topic was actually their 12-year-old, and it had to do with suicide. And it was really interesting to have that conversation with parents prior to coming into this presentation, because developmentally, one of the things that I talked to them about was get prepared to have the second wave of adolescence. So if anybody can think back and remember what it was like going through adolescence in all of those waves of emotions, if you're a parent of somebody who's coming into their adolescent years, be prepared that you're going to be riding that wave again. It's going to look different, but there's going to be a lot of emotional shifts, especially in these early stages of emotional development, of adolescent development, because that limbic system has a lot of things that are going in on it with hormones and these neurotransmitters that has not connected and brought on fully the prefrontal cortex. And as we know, the limbic system is really about emotions and perceiving of social interactions. Okay, I need to do something. There we go. Whoops, back. Okay, so now we're going to go into the two main topics of this presentation. So non-suicidal self-injury is defined as deliberate self-inflicted destruction on body tissue without suicidal intent, and it's for the purposes of usually not socially sanctioned. It's not socially sanctioned, and it includes behaviors such as cutting, burning, biting, scratching skin. It can be hitting. There's many ways that suicidal self-injury can happen. The most common that this in SSI happens is in adolescents and young adults. Typically, the onset is between 13 and 14 years of age. And again, this is why I thought it was so important to talk about brain development and social development, because again, that prefrontal cortex isn't online and that limbic system is lit up. So NSSI is highest among those with emotional distress, negative emotionality, depression, emotion dysregulation, and most importantly, I think is really important, is that common with people who are prone to self-directed negative emotions and self-criticism. So that's really about turning inwards and having a really negative view of self. Okay, so in past research, it used to be thought that it was more common in females than in males. In the more recent research, it's indicating that it's actually about equal. However, what the choices are for the self-harming between males and females in adolescence is a little bit different. So one of the things that is really, really important to understand, and it may get a little bit confusing because I'm going to talk about this in conjunction with suicide, but it's really important that non-suicidal self-injury and suicidal behaviors are different. They're not the same. So NSSI methods differ, and what they can include is like cutting, burning, picking, hitting, versus more suicidal behavior, which would be methods which would include gun and hanging, and self-poisoning. One of the things that I think is really interesting and is really important to note is that NSSI it's often done when there is an absence of suicidal ideation. And this is really important. And in the next video that I'm going to show you, we're going to talk about some of the reasons why people engage in non-suicidal self-injury. The thing about this, though, is that during the episodes of the non-suicidal self-injury, even though there is an absence of suicidal ideation, research suggests that this is one of the greatest risk factors that does contribute to future suicide attempts. So it is important to pay attention to this because it does factor into potential suicide attempts. So what I think is really, really important is to notice is within our LGBTQ community, with our ages of our kids between 11 and 19, self-reported self-injury was at 65% in the United Kingdom. Here in the United States, it's going to be similar. We know that within the LGBTQ community with our kids, there's a lot of sense of negative feelings, feeling alone, feeling isolated, and we definitely have a higher risk within that. Now, that's not to say that there are not kids within the LGBTQ community that are functioning very healthy. They certainly are. Okay. So some of the things that we need to really kind of pay attention to, and I just put these out there. This is not a complete list, but however, these are some things to really kind of pay attention to for non-suicidal self-injury. If you see any of the teens kind of covering their body parts, wearing long sleeves or pants when it doesn't seem kind of appropriate to the weather or the environment, any kind of wounds that are not healing and or scars where you're seeing a tremendous amount of scars, bandages that are excessive. In other words, if they get hurt and they have to have a Band-Aid, that's fine. But if you're seeing a lot of bandages and there's not really a good explanation of that, I would have a heightened awareness of this. If you're starting to see any kind of sharp collection, and it could include razor blades, it could include needles. I had one teen when I was working in the high-risk intensive outpatient who would use needles to basically kind of poke through their skin. And there would be at times where they shared with me a photo of upwards to 20 needles that they had underneath the skin. And although that's very disturbing to hear, it's really important for us to understand the many, many ways in which self-injury can happen. Watching a lot of social media that is focused around suicidal self-injury is also, I think, something to pay attention to. However, that does not mean that is causing, or that somebody is engaging in non-suicidal self-injury. I would say that that's something that I want to watch. Excessive picking, unexplained bruises, especially I think on the boys, we tend to see more of hitting or running themselves into objects that can bruise themselves. If you see that the kids are kind of avoiding social or sport activities that they may have done prior, there's a couple reasons why. One of them, though, is that it could be seen. In other words, their peers could possibly see if they were maybe changing out of clothes, or if they were doing a social activity where some of their body parts could be exposed. So that is, I think, of an interesting thing that we need to kind of pay attention to. So a couple of the things we also need to really watch is anxiety, depression, and most specifically, emotional dysregulation. That is a really, really important one to pay attention to. Okay. This is a video, and I just want to put a warning out there, so does YouTube. This is 13 things that people who engage in non-suicidal self-harm want you to know. It is important to note that these 13 are based upon, personal opinions. And after that, I'm going to talk about a few of them because I suspect there might be a few questions about this later on. Okay. Darn it. Hold on. I entered it incorrectly. I thought I had it right. I'm going to have to search it. I'm very sorry. My apologies about that.
Depending on how long this has been happening, people may become desperate to feel something. There's a lot of misleading information and even stereotypes out there about self-harming, and this can lead to many not taking it seriously. There have even been cases where people dismiss other people's suffering simply because they're self-injuring. So, here are 13 things people who self-harm want you to know. Before we begin, we'd like to warn that the following content may be triggering to some audiences. If you feel uncomfortable about this topic on self-harm, you may want to stop and watch another video instead. We would also like to mention that this video is created for educational purposes only and is not intended to substitute a professional diagnosis. If you are self-harming or know somebody who is, we highly advise you to seek help from a qualified mental health professional. Number 1, self-harm doesn't mean wanting to die. Although there are suicidal people who injure themselves, not everyone who does it wants to die. Those who want to continue living injure themselves for many other reasons. 2, to feel something other than numbness. The problem with depression and other forms of mental disorders is the experience of numbness. Depending on how long this has been happening, people may become desperate to feel something. They may resort to self-harm to feel pain, even if it's on a physical level. 3, the scars on their body don't give you the permission to ask what happened. Just because you can see their scars doesn't mean they want to talk about it. For some people, scars are a visual reminder of the pain they went through. The last thing they want to do is talk about it, especially with strangers. 4, self-injury isn't always a call for attention. One stereotype is that people who hurt themselves, especially cutters, are seeking attention. While there may be some out there who want it and use it as a cry for help, there are also those who don't want the attention. In fact, many hide their scars or self-harm in areas that are difficult to notice. 5, it's a distraction from emotional pain. People who are in abusive situations, coping with trauma, or having difficulties managing their emotions may end up relying on self-injury to distract themselves from the anguish they feel. It can allow them to focus on something else temporarily. 6, it's a means of punishment. There are some who feel guilty, ashamed, or upset with themselves. They may believe that whatever is happening to them is their fault, and to cope with this, they harm themselves as a means of self-punishment. 7. Self-injury helps solidify emotional pain. There are some people who may feel overwhelmed by their emotions, or even feel weird and confused about them. So they hurt themselves as a symbol of their pain. It's a way of confirming that what they're going through is real. 8. It's a reminder of the future. Some hurt themselves during specific moments in their lives. They may leave visible scars as a reminder of what they've gone through and have endured. And this helps them have a sense of security for what's yet to come. 9. Self-harm doesn't always equal cutting. Although cutting is quite common and is what's mostly shown in movies and television shows, there are other forms of self-harm. Burning, picking at your skin, hair pulling, and head banging are some examples. 10. Teenagers aren't the only ones who self-harm. While self-harm is often depicted in media as common in teenage girls, people who self-injure can be of any age, race, sexual orientation, or from any economic or social background. 11. It's a way of self-control. People who are struggling in situations out of their control can feel trapped and overwhelmed, so they may injure themselves as a way to cope. In their mind, harming themselves gives them a sense of control from everything that is happening around them. 12. It's addictive, and it isn't easy to stop. Those who have never injured themselves may believe self-harming is easy to quit, but people who relied on self-injury for a long time can become addicted. The reason behind their self-harming can make it difficult to stop. In fact, those who are addicted can relapse during stressful situations. And 13. Self-harming doesn't equal depression. Most of society believes people who self-injure are depressed, and although it can be common for those with clinical depression, you do not need to be depressed to hurt yourself. It can be a response to trauma or other mental disorders like obsessive-compulsive disorder and eating disorders. If you relate to this video, we want you to know that you're not alone and there's always someone to reach out to. We've provided a list of helplines in the description below. Self-harming is no laughing matter and should never be taken lightly. Some resources for help are added in the description box below, and if you found this video helpful, be sure to like and share this video with those who might benefit from it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move from the self-harming because I know that we're going to have a lot of questions about that, and I want to be able to provide more of a discussion in that, and the same with suicide. But I do want to go into some of the statistics on youth suicide. Okay, so according to the most recent publication from the CDC, most suicides, believe it or not, are by the age group of middle-aged, so 35 to 64 years of age. So of all the suicides in the United States, over 47% of them are actually in the middle-aged group. Less than 10% are in our older adults over 75 years of age. So when it comes to our youth, they categorize as it between 10 and 24. If you remember, earlier we were talking about the developing brain. The brain continues to develop up into our mid-20s. So it's 14% of all the suicides in the United States, still concerning. It's the third leading cause of death. However, what's really important, again, to talk about is it's the second leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 14. And the one group that is at the most risk, the highest risk, is the non-Hispanic Native American and Alaska Natives. And if we could break it down a little bit further by group, although the youth have a lower rate of suicide, they have a higher rate of admittance into the emergency room in 2019 for suicide attempts or suicidal behaviors. Of that, 9% report that within a 12-month period in 2019, 9% had an attempt. It's a higher rate of attempt for females than males, 11% for females and about 6.6% for males. And again, and I think that this is really important to talk about, is when you break it down to non-Hispanic Native American or Alaskan Native American, it is at 25%. It's pretty astounding to me. So within our LGBTQ teens and adolescents, it's another concerning group because they're 4 times more as likely to attempt as compared to their peers. 1.8 million seriously consider suicide between the ages of 13 and 24 that are within this group. And by the Trevor Project, which is a great resource, by the way, for our LGBTQ community, they did a survey in 2022, and 45% of those who are in the LGBTQ seriously considered suicide in that year. What's more alarming is that when we then become to the transgender and the non-binary, it is almost about half. So it's even more concerning within the subgroup of the LGBTQ with transgender and those who are non-binary. Another thing that is really becoming of concern is within our Black male youth. There's been an increase of 60% of Black males dying by suicide. They're twice as likely to die as their counterparts by suicide. Some of the things that they've identified for predictors within this group is community violence, socioeconomic stress, the stigma, and perceived discrimination, and most importantly, interpersonal and family conflict, according to the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. So these are some additional risk factors that have been identified. These are not all of them, but again, these are important ones to think about. If there's an existing mental health or substance use disorder, more specifically, we're talking about depression, anxiety, alcohol use, impulsive behavior and tendencies, romantic breakups, peer and social conflict. If there is a firearm in the household, these two next two are very important. Access to a firearm is very, very important of a risk factor, as well as a family history of suicide. Additionally, exposure to suicidal behaviors of others, prior suicide attempts, and again, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about in the previous slides, is if there's a history of non-suicidal self-injury. So some things that we need to look for when we're kind of assessing around the thought of, if any of our kids are at risk. If we're seeing a change of their eating and sleeping behaviors, alcohol and drug use, withdrawal from friends and family members, the neglect of personal appearance, lack of response to praise, irritability, especially with our teen boys, although there is within the females, with our young females, with a tendency towards self-criticism, that can also come out as irritability. Sadness or crying spells, posts on social media suggesting feelings of isolation and depression, talking about or otherwise indicating plans to commit suicide or self-harm, giving away cherished items is really also very important, and lack of interest of social group. An additional thing to kind of talk about that we've seen in, I don't know if it's actually been researched in teens, but we do see a tendency, at least in adults, that there can be this phenomenon after they have actually made a suicide plan, that you might actually see a relief of some of these symptoms, that there might actually be a sense of peace. And that is something to very, very pay attention to. So if you've had a period of time of depression, anxiety, a lot of crying and sadness, a lot of these other symptoms, and then you have sudden, with an unexplained reason, a sense of peace, and especially if you see any of giving away of cherished items, that is a time to act at that time. So how do we talk about it all? Well, this is the thing, and clearly I want to have a lot of conversation with all of you about this. When I'm talking with my parents about their teens, the number one thing that is, to me, has become important is managing your own feelings. So I understand that that can be very, very difficult. It's okay to feel scared, surprised, shocked, even angry. It's okay to have those feelings. However, it is super, super important that you manage those. If your teen comes to you and they start talking to you about self-injury or suicidal thoughts or any other kind of risky behavior, and they sense from you that you're anxious, that you're maybe coming across as angry, it's going to shut them down. So it's really, really important to figure out ways for you to cope with your own feelings, even though that they are completely understandable and at times can be expected. These are your children, you love them. You know, anytime we are concerned about their safety, it can make us scared and anxious. So managing your own feelings is the number one thing I think is super important. Second thing is to really educate yourself. So the people who are attending this, obviously this is something that you recognize and you value, is to educate yourself as well as other adults in their lives about some of the things that you have seen in these slides and what we're going to talk about. I think this is another one that's really, really important, is to be aware of their environment. And this includes their use of social media, their friends, and just in the house. So it's not just their social environment, it's their physical environment as well. So it is paying attention if you are seeing any of these things, such as bandages laying around, if you're seeing sharp objects in a collection of sharp objects, anything out of the ordinary, it's really important for you to kind of be aware of this. We have to pay attention to what's going on in their environment. Along with that is that the youth are more willing to talk to us on their timeline. And so this is in conjunction with managing our feelings, is that a lot of times our feelings will come up and we want to have a talk with them right now. And that doesn't always, bode well. If there is a serious risk and an imminent risk, of course, that needs to be attended to. I'm talking perhaps about anything that's prior to that. We are going to have a more accessibility to having them hear us and us hear them when we realize that they're more willing to talk on their timeline. So when we're talking to our children, these are the things that I think is super important. We need to be open, and we need to really be open to what they are saying to us. We need to set aside our own initial desire to educate them or to overprompt them or to dig. We really need to be open to listening to what they start out with and take those cues. We need to be curious. And I've often talked about a board game I think I want to make. It's called the What If game. And I think anybody who's in, mental health field, we often talk about this, is the question of what if. And a lot of times that can come from a space of anxiety. Well, what if this will happen? What if that will happen? And what I like to talk about is actually we can use what if in two ways. We can use it that is born out of fear and anxiety and worry, or we can use it out of curiosity. And often it's about the tone and the space that we are in emotionally and how we perform that, or how we ask that question. And it's not just the what if, but it's also how, what, who. The tone and the intention behind it, a teen is going to pick up on. If we're asking it and it's pressured and we have a lot of feeling behind it, that's out of our own anxiety and a desire to fix the problem. If, however, we're coming in with curiosity, they're going to be more willing to talk to us about it. What goes with that is judgment. We have to have a non-judgmental space. If we are throwing out judgments, it's going to shut them down. The next two ones I think are really, really important. We need to create opportunities for our kids. And what I mean by that is it can be a structured creation, or it can be just a creation of just a topic, of just to talk about it, not to personalize it with them, but just to bring up the topic and say, hey, I learned this and I was, this is what I kind of learned. What are your thoughts? But the second one that is so, so important, let me go back to that. The structured one of the things that I've talked about with some of my parents with talking with their kids is not in the moment of tension, but in more of a relaxed time, is to be able to come up and collaboratively speak with them about setting aside a specific time during the week in which your teens can come to you, and if they want to, they can ask you. There has to be some rules and some guidelines within that. And I think within the family unit, I think it's important that they come up with that, but it has to be rules and guidelines of that structured time, that the teens are they're part of the team on deciding what the rules and guidelines of that discussion looks like. So you can have a structured one, and you can also have kind of an impromptu of like, hey, this is what I've learned, and don't push them too much, but let them know that you're showing an interest of these things, and that's creating an opportunity for discussion. The second one, which is so important, and it kind of comes back to that kids are more willing to talk on their timeline, is you have to be open to the opportunities that they give us. One of the things when my daughters were growing up and they were, in the teen years, and it took me a while to kind of figure it out, they would come to me at night after dinner was done, after homework was done. Generally, I was relaxing in my bedroom reading. And to this day, my daughters are both in their mid-20s. They said, you remember we'd come in at like 9:30 at night and we just sit on your bed and we would talk? And I'm like, yeah. It took me a little bit going back and reviewing that and realizing that that was their way of coming to me, because that's when they felt most comfortable. Some teens, it could be the drive to, school. It's just remembering that we have to be open to those opportunities. We have to be looking for them. And that's really, really important, is to pick up on the opportunities that they are giving us. So words matter very, very much. This is one of the little coins that I've come up, is that we need to omit, commit. And what I mean by that is when we start talking about suicide and non-suicidal self-injury, is when we say commit, it often is around a moral judgment, and it kind of criminalizes it. So I want you to really think about it when you hear this. So-and-so committed suicide. And I still slip. I'm not going to lie. I have to be very, very intentional about this. I grew up in an era and culturally within a family unit that, it was immoral to commit suicide. I have to be very careful when talking about suicide with with anybody, to be honest, that I don't use the word commit. It is much less stigmatizing if we say death by suicide, loss by suicide. It really takes away both kind of like the idea of crime and also a moral judgment. One of the other things that I think we really need to avoid is the phrase, we need to talk. As soon as we say that to our teens, which, remember, their job is to start separating from us. At this stage, developmentally, they're supposed to start, creating their own identity. As soon as we come in with, we need to talk, we introduce a power differential that admittedly exists. However, it makes it feel like they don't have an option in it. And so what would be a better approach is, I would like to know more about. The second thing that we really need to do is validate their feelings and their thoughts. One of the things when I was working in the intensive outpatient was working with the parents, and they would come into group, excuse me. And I remember one parent said, I don't agree with that she, this is what she says. For example, she says she's stupid. Excuse me. And I said, I understand that. What we have to remember is validation does not equal agreement. We don't have to agree with somebody to validate their feelings or their thoughts. The technique is to say, I understand that this is the way you feel. And it's really important to then open up the opportunity to better understand it from their perspective. If we shut them down immediately with "you're not stupid," it invalidates their feelings, which doesn't do anything to kind of bring in the emotional connection that they're seeking with you, and also help do some coping strategies for them to emotionally come back into a more regulated state, to become more, to bring on the prefrontal cortex, excuse me, and reasoning. Another thing we need to do is ask open-ended questions that convey the intention behind that is to better understand their perspective. So open-ended questions are questions that are more specific. Instead of saying, "How was your day?" You could say, "Tell me something about your math class. Tell me something, what is important for me to know about your day?" It becomes more specific and it shows interest in their perspective, rather than really seeking for us to say, "How was your day?" And if they say, "Oh, it's good," or "it's bad," it kind of, with teens, remember, their limbic system, their emotional and their social part of their brain is really lit up, and the prefrontal cortex is still coming on. And so those aren't wholly connected. And a lot of times the emotions are they're ruling what's going on. So asking open-ended questions really gets to understand from their perspective. Another thing is really encouraging healthy coping strategies. So a lot of times, especially with non-suicidal self-injury, this is really a coping mechanism. If you think about what they talked about in the 13 things that they want you to know, a lot of it was around, coping, emotional, feeling, it felt like they felt in control. There's a lot of stuff around this that it's coping strategies that aren't really that healthy. We'll talk a little bit more about healthy coping strategies. And the most important thing about this, when we are encouraging healthy coping strategies, again, it needs to be a collaboration. If we're just kind of shoving down, "Oh, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this," we're just going to shut them down. We're not really opening it up to hear their perspectives, as well as encourage them to start problem solving. Okay, so these are some important things. Anybody who works with me, they know that I talk about sleep, adults and kids. Research, we're getting more and more research that shows how important sleep is. For our teens, it's super, super important. And as wholly across the board, I don't think we're doing a very good job. They really should be getting between 9 and 10 hours of sleep. I want you to think about what that brain is going through with all that growth, all those hormones, the physical demands that are going on in their body. They really, really need more sleep than what they're getting. Exercise and diet. These are the things that we always talk about, but really exercise can be a coping strategy as well. If we use exercise, even a 10-minute walk has shown clinically that it can, elevate mood from depression. And of course, diet is also super important. This is not to do with things, it's more just under the topic of things that matter. We really, really need to stop and think about, which I know a lot of parents are doing. These kids in this age group, they have so much increasing performance pressure between sports, academic, volunteering. I mean, some of my teens that are coming in 12, 13 years old, at that age, they're like, "Well, I have to do this so that I can get my AP class, so that I can do this, and that I can, make sure that I have all this volunteer stuff on my resume so that I'm applying for college." They're 12 years old. It's really, society, we're putting a lot of pressure on these kids. Same thing with sports. Younger and younger at age, there's a lot of pressure on some certain kids that sports is about performance. And so we really, really need to encourage balance between all of these things, because of course, sports, academic, and volunteering can all be really, really positive things. However, it can also go into a space that can really create a lot of self-criticism and self-doubt. So we need to figure out how to balance these things for our kids. Okay, so some of the strategies that I think are super important is, and this is a little bit challenging, I'm not gonna say, "We'll just do this and it'll work." However, more and more research is really, really showing how mindfulness is beneficial to everybody. And it really is attending to the moment. And it's really, really training our brain. And we're seeing, some of the research around fMRIs and we're seeing how mindfulness actually changes the structure of the brain, enhancing the efficiency of the things that really kind of protect us. So I think mindfulness is a wonderful thing. There's a lot of different ways we can introduce mindfulness for our teens. We can talk about that a little bit. One of the other things is, like we talked about, emotions for teens, it often is running their lives. Now, I don't want to say that our kids are just completely out of control with their emotions. However, it's pretty common for them to have moments throughout their day, throughout their week, and it's normal for them to have, emotional, flooding and difficult emotions. So, besides validating their emotions, including teaching them self-validation, another one is really distraction, because a lot of times emotions are going to kind of come in like a wave. They may come crashing in, but they also kind of go out. And if we can start to introduce the idea of a distraction, a healthy distraction, it can help that wave not feel quite so like it's crashing against the rocks. Really encouraging sharing versus holding negative feelings and thoughts. And it doesn't even have to be, well, let's talk about them. Let's dissect them. Let's go into all of it. But really being able to say, I'm feeling sad today. Okay, I hear that you're feeling sad today. And really, and to ask them, do you want to talk more about that? Or is it important for me to know that you feel sad? And this is really important, not only because, as anybody who's been in this field, when we start talking and sharing about these things, they don't hold so much space and we don't ruminate nearly as much. The second thing about it is that when we actually start talking about things, a lot of these negative feelings and thoughts are very, very isolating. So when teens can begin to express themselves, they're not necessarily quite so isolated, and that's super important. The other aspect of it is that we can actually introduce the concept of really getting to know what our emotions are, and that emotions actually, that they're very complex. And the more our teens understand their emotions and the benefits of them, of all emotions, that, again, remember, early in the video, they said the more we use it, the more it's going to kind of stay in there. So if we can learn to master a lot of our emotional language and experience in our teens, that's going to only benefit them, not only during their adolescence, but also as they grow. This other one I think is really, really important. If it ever does come to a point that your teen needs to seek professional help, this is really important, that recent research is really supporting the concept of a safety plan and not a contract. And what I mean by that, with suicidal behaviors or non-suicidal self-harm, a lot of times in years past, clinically, we'd talk about creating a no self-harm contract. And actually, what is working better is what they consider as a safety plan. And in the safety plan, and it's a collaborative effort, is really talking with the person about, recognizing difficult thoughts and feelings that may lead to self-harm, identifying people that, that they can use, identifying different coping strategies, having, a list of people to call, including if they have a therapist. So safety plan does a couple different things. It's a very specific plan rather than a contract. And on top of it, it really is focusing about the care of the person, including self-care and promoting self-care, along with the guidance of the people identified that are safe in their life. Where a contract, again, it kind of has this moral aspect of it. And I feel like, contract this is a personal opinion. I'm sure other clinicians have different opinions. The contract really kind of feels as if, again, it's not really about the person, but it's more about making other people feel like they did their job. So if it ever gets to the point where something becomes to a clinical point where there actually needs to be treatment or professional help, again, words super, super matter. And so we have to make sure that we go in when we're talking to our teens and we are actually concerned to the point that we think that they need to speak to a professional person. We need to not do it in a stigmatizing way. You have a problem. You've been doing this. It's much, much better if we actually come in and we say something like, this is a lot for anyone, and you deserve really good support. You are important, and this is important, and somebody might have some better things and understand some stuff better so that we can do a better job. So it's really, really important to think about the language that we're talking about our teens when we talk about actually seeking professional help. So some of the things that have shown to have some good outcome is dialectical behavior therapy. I did a lot of this in the IOP. In fact, that's what we used. It really is helpful of reducing a lot of behaviors. I think that there's some more recent research that it says that it may not completely do as effective on reducing suicidal ideation. However, it does certainly have a pretty good reduction of suicidal behaviors. Again, another one would be cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's really important that whoever we're seeking is pretty trauma informed. And lastly, what I think is really, really important is to talk about, the parents, the adults. You may need to have support yourself. If it gets to this, it's very overwhelming and scary. And just as we're not going to stigmatize kids, I think it's super important to recognize that we all need a little extra help sometimes. And if you have the support, you're going to support your children more effectively. Okay, so we're at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and open up for discussion and questions, what you would like to talk about. And also, I'm putting together a resource guide. I did tell people that I would have that together. I will have that together, make sure that I get it off to CIP, and anybody who's interested in that, I most definitely will put together a resource guide for you. Okay, so I think that's the end of this. I'm going to stop share, and then I'm going to refer to other people to help me go through questions. Okay. Are there any questions?
Happy to take questions from the audience. You can drop it in the chat, or you could.
Looks like Helen has her hand up.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm curious, when is a parent supposed to bring in professional help? Like, when is it something that you can't handle and that a professional really should be brought in? My fear is that I will overreact or underreact.
Sure. And I think that that's a normal concern as a parent or a guardian is, am I going to overreact or underreact? Like I said, this is pretty emotional stuff. And we ourselves as the adults in their lives, we're going to have some emotional reaction to this. So I think it comes back to, again, some of the warning signs and really coming up with a good understanding of what is something that's concerning that compared to moving into when do I seek professional help. Having an open discussion, I think, is super important. When you start really seeing kind of the social isolation, if you are seeing isolation also from the family, and what's really, really important is to think that it needs to be for a period of time. And that can be a little bit tough. And what I mean by that is, again, it's kind of this emotional roller coaster. So from one day, a kid come home and say, my life is terrible. Everything, nobody likes me. I'm all of this. And that's actually fairly common. If, however, this is a continuing theme for a significant amount of time, a couple weeks, I would say, I would start to investigate this a little bit more and talk with them and perhaps get some feedback from other adults, whether it's school, to really kind of assess if, is this just happening at home? Is this at school? Are we seeing, these concerning behaviors somewhere else? And again, having an open dialogue that's that's destigmatizing. So really asking them, well, what do you think? Do you think somebody, can help us? Do you think that would be helpful for you? Does that answer your question, Helen?
It does. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. So I see Sterling. I'm just going to read this. Is that okay? And Catherine, I see yours as well. I have been experiencing an increased number of young children, 9 to 10 years old, experiencing intrusive thoughts, including suicide plans and self-harm. Can you address this and how you would approach this presentation? Well, I think there's a couple notable things. We are seeing this happen in younger and younger. And one of the reasons why I brought it up in the concept of really talking about that we're seeing a higher rate of completed suicide in our younger teens. I'm going to have to put aside a little bit this because it's a little bit. Again, so we have this brain development phase that after 14, it gets a little bit better. But I do think that this group is a little bit higher at risk. Again, it also goes back to, I think, socially in the access of technology, their ability to really receive a lot of information, including social media such as TikTok. Actually, Twitter is one recently that my teens have been talking about that surprised me, as well as Snapchat. And so they're kind of getting inundated about it. And so I do see an increase in these intrusive thoughts, including the SI. When we move from the ideation and we actually move into planning, I think it's really important to make that distinction. So ideation is, I'm thinking about this. This is a thought that I have. On occasion, I have this thought. Moving into a plan becomes much more specific. I have put this aside. I've saved perhaps medication, or again, firearms is a super important one, is access to firearms. When we start moving into plans and actual self-harm, we need to be much more much more involved. So early on in suicidal ideation, there's a lot of discussion about it. When we move from ideation into planning and actual self-harming, we need to become much more active in that. We need to make sure that we're taking care of their environment. That's why I talked about the environment. And I believe at that time, when we move into plans and actual scene of self-harm, that we need.
And if I'm not,
Sorry, Robin, you're live.
So once we move into the actual plans and we're actually seeing self-harm, we definitely need to get professional help involved in that. I hope that answers the question. And Catherine, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to put on my glasses.
I can read the question for you. Do you want me to read the first one?
Sure.
What do you recommend parents do in reaction to an SSI? How should they position themselves? And what should they say, do, and not say and do?
So I'm not quite sure I understand the idea of the positioning themselves, but I'll do the best that I can. I think that, again, I'm going to go back to this. And one of the things that I think is so important, the very first stage, when we become aware of non-suicidal self-harm, self-injury, is we need to manage our initial reaction. Very, very important. Because if we come in with the energy of fear, anger, or anxiety, it's going to shut our teen down. And our goal is really to come in with a calm and open and kind of an inquisitive attitude. That's super, super important. If we come in and our anxiety is prevailing, not only are you going to shut them down in that moment, but it can also shut down for any kind of future kind of events that potentially could have. As far as positioning yourself, I think I'm going to have to clarify that, but what should they say, do, and not say or do? So one of the most important things is to say, is to validate that they are important to you, that that they understand, you know, that this must be a difficult time for them, that we are there for them, and that we are open. And again, really coming in with language about better understanding the position. You're going to definitely increase your attendance and awareness of them. It can be a little bit tricky, because if you become overly protective, that's not going to be good. However, we have to protect our kids. And, you know, because non-suicidal self-injury, like I had talked about before, doesn't necessarily mean that they are suicidal, but there is a correlation from non-suicidal self-injury that is a large risk factor for suicide attempts and suicide. So we have to take it seriously. We need to pay attention to their environment. We need to come up with a plan with them about talking about self-injury. And again, it really needs to be collaborative. If we come in and say, you're not going to do this, or you're going to show me your arms every morning, you're going to show me your stomach, it's really long-term. It's not building a team. And we really want to build a team with our teens. Build a team with our teens. And so it's a collaboration of understanding that the behavior is not a good coping strategy. And so how do we assess that? How do we encourage them to assess the things that may trigger them to self-harming? And what are some other better coping strategies? Again, I think validation is really important without agreement. And I do think it's important for us to share, you know, our feelings about that after our kids have been able to explain everything. The tone in which we say that is very, very important. To say to them, I'm concerned about this, and really important, and I'm here for you. I'm a resource for you. I hope that answered that.
Thanks, Jennifer. I know there's a second question. Oh, did you go on?
Yeah, you know, there's a couple different theories about this, and there's also, you know, there used to be a lot of discussion about is it as a result, or is it because of child sexual abuse? So I think that there's some validity to that, Catherine. I can't speak overly. It's not something that I am overly aware of. I think that, again, when we're talking about non-suicidal self-injury, there's a lot of reasons behind that. And one of them is really about emotional dysregulation, and how do I express these emotions, or how do I even know what they are? We really need to increase our language and understanding of emotional health for our teens, because so, first of all, it's so very important and prevalent in their day-to-day lives, their emotional world. And the more conversation that we have about feelings of rage, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of loneliness, feelings of self-criticism, along with all of the other what we call positive feelings, the more that we begin to understand them and we begin to have language around them, the less that they rule in our teens' head. And it's really, really important to be able to have these conversations with our kids about emotional health and the fact that all emotions, to just actually talk about emotions and what that means. Robin.
She says it's so common for parents to feel guilty, think it's their fault, and then take it personally and then blame their kids.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Robin. Again, this is kind of a couple things that I pointed out in the slides. And I thank you for pointing that out, because that is definitely one emotion that I didn't talk about, was parents feeling guilty. I think that is, guilty and shame, right? And shame also is a big feeling, I think, with both suicidal behaviors and also non-suicidal self-harm. Yeah, guilt. Again, so let's normalize this. I think it's normal for a parent to feel guilty. Do it, and so to validate, okay, I understand that you feel guilty about that. And how do we take care of that? So again, it really is about either self-soothing ourselves as a parent, either with our partner or another adult, or again, getting our own professional help, I think is super important to help us move through this, because it is so important that we don't blame the kids. Because a lot of times when we will have this, I think a lot of us in this room will understand this on the clinical side, we may have this one feeling of guilt or shame or fear. And, what we get is a secondary one, which is anger. And a lot of times, so if a parent might feel guilty about this, they might then feel angry because they feel so helpless in that. And then that becomes the blaming to the kids. I think that's a really important point, Robin. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions in the group?
So I want to talk about a little bit about the concept of guilt, shame, and blaming. So, again, I kind of alluded to it in the slides. Our kids are still paying attention to us. So although their peers are more and more important, from 9 up to 12, up to 18 and beyond, I think it's a misconception that they are not listening to us. They are absolutely listening to us. They're absolutely watching us, and they're still taking cues from us. And so how we cope with our own emotional internal world, they're watching that, and we are demonstrating to them about that. So I think it's important also to be able to be vulnerable with our kids, to say, yeah, sometimes I feel bad, and to normalize that. What comes in behind that, though, is how do we engage in healthy coping strategies with difficult emotions or thoughts? And we can model that for our kids. It's really important to remember, even though they may even discount us, they still are watching us very, very much. Anything else?
Well, I just like to add that you're a terrific presenter, and this is such an important topic. And also that there is hope, that all the clinicians here have worked with people who, 8 years ago made a suicide attempt, and their life is really good now and strong, and they're far from that. So there is hope.
Absolutely. Another good point. Along with, we can sometimes have for a parent or an adult in the child's life, when there is kind of this self-harming behavior, whether it's suicidal or not. A lot of feelings, commingling of feelings, of feeling alone, of feeling helpless, of feeling ashamed, of feeling of helpless and hopeless, that, you know, that can come up. And again, you know, it's a normal reaction to what we feel is an abnormal event. And so for us to know and to be able to show to our kids that there is hope, that this is a temporary space, that if we can look towards the future, that there is hope and that there is help, that is super, super important as a foundational rock for them to be able to hold on to.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Hello.
Hi, I'm Myra, and so thank you for your time. You know, raising teens at this age of times is really exhausted and is scary.
Mhm.
But I wanted to say, share that in my case, one of my fears of when my youngest son studied the teenagers, how I was going to navigate. And one thing that, based on that concern, I invested in having seeing a therapist for myself, just to, again, wanted to be prepared. And in my case also is the fact that discovering the grieving. My youngest son lost his dad. And so for me, that was something really very scary and new and overwhelmed. So because I saw the waves, I was never familiar with the waves of grieving. So, but one of the a few things would like to say in regards to that, that you mentioned, that really I could testify that it was so important, and that I learned is about that words matter. Many times I have to take deep breaths before I react. And then also the timeline. Sometimes it's like 10 o'clock.
Yes.
And I'm exhausted. But I just literally have to take the opportunity to do that with my kiddo ones. And it's just a progress. We've been doing this since, it's going to be 5 years now. It has been like a long road. And it's the time to invest, and for me to educate myself is never this is something I literally do, and it has worked for us definitely. I learned to listen. Literally, I learned it's a difference between hearing and listening.
Yes.
They are two different things. The hearing, when things happen, right away I wanted to react and start thinking strategies about, no, this is what you need to do. No, this is this. And I literally have to retrain my brain to not to react on things like that.
Super important. Yeah, Myra, thank you. That is absolutely true. One of the things, so to get into some more basic, maybe not basic skills, but to your point, is that idea of reacting, and to further the concept of words matter, pauses matter as well. When we feel it in our body, when we have a big emotional reaction to, say, finding out our child is self-harming or they have thoughts of suicide, we're going to have a flood of emotion and physiological reaction as well. And so a lot of times our first thought is to react to that. And so I think it, to speak to your point, the difference between hearing and listening, a lot of times I think what moves us from the hearing to the listening, or, to actually understanding, is what I call is the pause. So when we get that emotional reaction and we feel that flooding of our body physiologically, that is the time that we pause. And I literally myself, I do this. I still do this. Especially when my kids were teenagers, when they would come to me with very difficult topics and I had this emotional reaction, I taught myself, and I literally talked to myself in my head. I just counted super slow. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. And I kind of reassessed in that 3 seconds. It's really not that long if you think about it. As I reassessed, is my body coming back down? Is it relaxing a little bit? If it's not, it was super important for me to share with my kids of like, I need just a second. I want to make sure that I can hear you. So I need to just kind of, get myself together. It does 2 things. One, it lets them know that you're doing your own, this is in real life, you're demonstrating to them how you are managing your own emotions. The second thing it's letting them know, instead of this big long pause that they're like, well, you're not listening to me, you're not hearing me. What it does is if we can't kind of get our system down and really be able to calm ourselves within that 3 seconds, it's letting them know, I still hear you. This is still important. I just need to make sure that I'm in a space that I can hear you. So I use that quite a bit. So that was a beautiful thing that you shared. Thank you, Myra.
Thank you. If may I ask now in regards to the trauma-informed therapy, where do I seek resources for this type of counseling? Is any specific center or?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to turn that maybe over to Amanda or some of the other people on the CIP.
Okay.
The only reason why I say that is because I'm actually located in the Sacramento area. And
Okay.
It's important for you to have resources that are local.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we can share CIP as a resource. Before I kind of get to that point, I wanted to see if there's any other questions, and if not, then I'm happy to share about CIP.
I have one more. I think what's common is for kids in middle school or high school, unfortunately more common these days, to hear about somebody having committed suicide or making an attempt. And then a notice might go out to all the parents. And I found that a lot of parents have called wanting to know if they should bring it up to their child or not, or wait for their child to bring it up. When obviously it's all the way, talk through in the schools. I usually recommend to parents to bring it up because I think it's, hard to talk about and a taboo subject. But could you say something about what parents might be able to say to kids when there has been an incident in one of their schools?
Yeah. So to your point, I think that for me, when my parents come to me and they say, should I talk about this? And I've actually had teens in this past year that it's actually happened. The teens, are already working with me and they themselves bring it in. And again, it's an opportunity for us to just kind of talk about it, like what's going on. How do you feel about this? And really, again, opening up the opportunity for them to share. So it's for us to engage in a conversation, to understand from their perspective, and then to offer up to them, what would you what else would you like to know? Is there something you think that I should talk to you about, or I should find information if you yourself don't know the information? So I think, I think it's an opportunity. If the school is, sadly, I don't want to dismiss the fact that it's a unfortunate opportunity. If though this information is coming in, most kids, when they hear about this is gonna be very important. It's not going to be kind of a light topic. It may dissipate in a short amount of time if there's not a lot that's behind it. However, in the moment, within that week, maybe within those first 2 weeks of knowing about this is going to be on their mind, and it's going to be discussed a lot within their groups. So I think it's super important for us to, be open and actually take that time to talk with them about these things. And again, educating ourselves about this. I'm going to give some more resources out there. I'm going to provide a PDF of resources that I'll give to CIP if anybody in this group wants those. And so it's keeping an open dialogue. Again, maintaining kind of that calm space is super, super important. It does bring up another topic I'm sure a lot of the clinicians that are in this group will understand. I have some personal feelings about this, but I still think it's important to talk about it. Sometimes, and I'll tell you those personal feelings in a minute that are about clinical, but sometimes we have heard about when there's been a suicide within a school or within a friend group, that we might have additional suicides or suicide attempts. And that is important for us to talk about. I think, again, because of our own anxieties that come up around this, that it can get we can become a little bit too protective, I think, or too agitated about it. And that might shut down the conversations for those kids. So this can happen. What I want to make clear, though, from my understanding and my experience, one person's suicide in a peer group is not going to be the reason that another child might attempt it. It means that they were already in a space that was very uncomfortable. So it may increase a child that's already at risk. And so we have to remember that. And so if there's already a concern about a child that is that's having suicidal ideation, that is engaging in self-harming, that is escalating, that we see some of these other symptoms, and there's a collection of them, we need to really be paying attention to that and really having a conversation with those kids. So I'm not sure if there's any other clinicians, anybody else in here who has some thoughts about that.
I would just share that we do know that kids are looking for an opportunity, just like you shared earlier, to speak and to talk and to be heard. And so I think bringing things up that are hard, but bringing it up, like you said, being calm, those types of conversations never increase risk. If we're bringing it up about substance abuse, if we're bringing it up about sex, there's this myth out there that exists that's going to increase the activity that we don't want to see. But in fact, it does the opposite. Giving a chance to safe space to talk is always going to be assistive to the child or the adolescent or the adult, right? So
or the adult, absolutely. And that's why I caution when we talk about, these, what we have talked about, in media, is these clusters of suicides. It's not actually, having the conversation is not going to cause that. And in fact, as Amanda was saying, it is a protective factor. The more open communication that we have around any of these things, whether it's violence, whether it's sex, whether it's self-harm, suicide, substance use, the more that we actually talk with our teens in a productive manner, that is actually an insulating factor.
I love your focus on listening and how that's been a thread through the whole presentation. And I think that parents, forget how incredibly powerful that is and feel like they want to do or fix. And the listening and being open and just sitting in the silence can be so like filling for their kids.
Absolutely.
And when you've done it, the first 10 times might be hard, but after that it gets easier. And then your kids can come and rely on that kind of space between the two of you.
Yes, the more that we practice it, just like anything, when we practice these skills, the more it becomes innate. It's just like if we were exercising, the more that we exercise the muscle, the more it just naturally does it. It's the same thing in our communication styles. So if it may feel awkward at first, well, that's understandable. It may not be something that you've actually done before. And, the more that we actually, again, find the opportunities or create the opportunities, the more that this is going to become a natural process and the teen is going to trust it.
I love that. And I also just want to add like how predictability in terms of these difficult conversations by like setting a tone, really like, environmentally engineering these types of conversations sometimes can be really lovely and inviting and welcoming. And anything that decreases like the tension and stress and increases predictability tends to have a better outcome. So the more we practice, then the more they kind of like feel like they know where the conversation is going to go and how we'll respond.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, so important.
Well, if there are no more questions or comments, we want to say thank you so much to Dr. Kellogg for an excellent presentation. I know this is sometimes a really difficult topic to talk about and can be really scary for parents. So I appreciate, and we all appreciate you coming to talk to us about it and how we might be able to have these conversations at home. And we also want to thank all of you who came to join us to learn more about this topic. Please fill out the survey that Amanda put in the chat box. We love to hear your feedback. It helps us know how you experience this and what we can do to best serve you. I also want to say, please feel free to reach out to us at Community Institute for Psychotherapy, also known as CIP. If you're interested in therapy, we do provide trauma-informed therapy, and we provide that. We have sliding scales, and we also work with Medi-Cal clients and people who have Beacon Health. So if we are a resource for our community, you can reach us by phone. Amanda will put that number in the chat box. I think she already has. It's 415-459-5999, extension 101. You can also, reach us by email. Not email, I apologize. You can see our website, cipmarin.org. This is a reminder that we have 2 more sessions of Raising Healthy Families. They will all be held via Zoom. Next week, we'll be following up with Dr. Warren Farrell. He'll be talking about the boys' crisis, why our sons are struggling, and what we can do about it. And then following that, we will end our series with the amazing Dr. Mason, aka Amanda. She's right there in the left-hand corner. She'll be talking about acing parent-teen partnership, 5 skills from relationship science to optimize adolescent development. That's all we have for tonight. If you have anything else, feel free to put us in the chat box or call us and reach out to us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer. You were wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be able to fill in, and I hope that people found it informative. All of you were so wonderful at CIP. Thank you so much, CIP. Do you want me to hang on for a little bit, or what would you guys like?
Well, only if people have questions, but I'd love it if you would send us your PowerPoint
Sure.
and your resources when you get them together.
I will do that.
Great.
I want to say thank you so much, and thanks to Asha.
Oh, you took off from me.
And again, if anyone attending has interest in learning more about our amazing supervisor program, I'm so happy to tell you about all the benefits. And you can reach out, and my extension is, what is my extension? I'm not sure, but if you call the main line, we will reroute you guys to me. I'm happy to talk about that as well.
Absolutely. Akia, should I send this information to you? Who should I send the info to?
Yeah,
Yes, you can.
you can send
Yeah.
it to A Reynolds. I'll drop her email in the chat. Her hands might be busy right now, so.
I'm gonna put on my glasses so I can read.
Yeah, Jennifer, you can send it to me. You could just reply to the email that we were originally emailing on, and then I'll get it over to Hira, who can send it out to the
Okay.
participants.
Thank you so much. Anything else for me?
No, unless, I don't know if anyone has any last questions. Sometimes people have ending questions after we end, and we welcome those. But other than that, no, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this. It was my pleasure.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Have a good evening.
Too.
You too.
Thanks.